Sometimes the things we think are bad are only bad to us. God sees things differently. We all know that bad things happen to people, but if you listen today, you'll discover that, thanks to Romans 8:28, Christians have a unique way of dealing with life's ups and downs. One Romans 8:28 student put it this way: "The truth of Romans 8:28 can change the way you think." It can cause a shift in your moods, emotions, and outlook. It has the potential to change your personality and your life circumstances over time. It has the power to transform troubled souls into people full of hope and optimism. It's the key to tenacity and boundless joy. And this promise bears your name. This is Romans 8:28. "And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to His purpose." You may be seated. Isn't it true that the majority of the important things in life are fairly straightforward? It is us that complicates them, but they are simple. And this is true for this verse, which is one of the simplest in the Bible. I mean, it's all one-syllable words. Only 3 of the 25 words in Romans 8:28 have more than one syllable. These one-syllable words are put together in such a way and compressed in such a way that they're the greatest truths to be found anywhere within the Scripture. So, here are 5 important truths from this verse that I want you to remember from Romans 8:28. First and foremost, this is a firm promise. This is not a suggestion or a possibility. It is a firm commitment. Take a look at what it says. "And we know." How incredibly important it is to know. I mean, we live in an age where people say you can't know anything for sure and where truth and knowledge appear to have taken a back seat to errors and opinions. And sometimes you wonder if truth even exists in some people's minds. But I'm here to tell you that what you know is critical. And here we are told something that we can know. The word know appears 1,098 times in the Bible, and the phrase we know appears 5 times in the book of Romans, where Paul says that we can know without a doubt that every aspect of our lives is in God's hands and will be divinely used by the Lord, not only to manifest His glory. We know that. It's unmistakable. We don't have to make any educated guesses about it. We don't need a counselor to tell us. It's in the Bible, and we're aware of it. Even if those words were removed, this verse would still be fantastic. Even if the verse began, "All things work together for good," and we didn't have the first phrase, "and we know," it would still be a fantastic verse. But "all things work together" isn't the beginning. It begins, "and we know." Donald Gray Barnhouse makes the following observation about that phrase. He says, "It would be wonderful if all things worked together for our good without our knowing it, and we would find out about it later." That'd be wonderful. But it is possible here and now to know that all things work together for our good, and to lay hold of that fact is to claim a new power in your life that will calm the turbulence and bring to quiet and confidence the whole of your life. Nothing can touch me unless it passes through the will of God. God has a plan for my life. God is working according to a fixed eternal purpose. And we know that all things work together. We know. How fortunate we are as Christ followers that we do not live our lives on the basis of maybes. We know what we know, and it makes a huge difference in how we live each day. Paul has spoken of the ability of the believer to know. For instance, in verse 22, he said, "For we know that the whole creation groans." We know that. And then we come to verse 28, and we know that all things work together for good. Romans 8:26. In the same way, the Spirit helps us in our weakness. We do not know what we ought to pray for, but the Spirit Himself intercedes for us through wordless groans. Now put all of those pieces together. They are not inadvertently adjacent to one another. The first verse is about knowing, and the second is about not knowing. It's not a coincidence. Here is the difficult road we follow as believers. While we can know that God is in control of our lives, verse 28, we cannot know how all the details are being fitted together. So sometimes we don't even know how to pray. We know that God is in control and that He will make all things right, but in between knowing that and living it, we don't always know how it all works out on a daily basis. Isn't that correct? We are aware of what we are aware of, but we also don't know what we don't know. When we don't know how it's working out, as Christians, we rest on the fact that we know how it's going to turn out. We may not know how it's working out, we do know how it turns out. This is a firm promise, and we are aware of it. You see, if God isn't working, Romans 8:28 doesn't work. God is working tirelessly, energetically, and purposefully on our behalf. God is bringing about this good on behalf of those who love Him. Here's what Isaiah says. Isaiah 64:4. For from of old men have not heard, nor perceived by the ear, neither hath the eye seen a God besides thee, who worketh for him that waiteth for him. God is working. This is a definitive promise, and we know. This is a divine promise, that God works. God is working in all of this. And then thirdly, this is a definitive promise. He works all things. The all things of this verse is completely understandable. You may think, oh yeah, this may work for a lot of people, but you don't know what I've been going through. My all things are not good, and God isn't involved in this. I'm outside of it. All things is inclusive in the fullest possible sense. It includes the suffering of verse 17. It includes the groaning of verse 23. In other words, all that is negative in this life is seen to have a positive purpose in the execution of God's eternal plan. What he is saying is that when you begin to see life in this way, when you realize that while there are incidents in your life, things that happen, bad things, good things, we often look at them individually, but God sees them as a part of His ultimate plan. And when we begin to understand that God has an ultimate plan for our lives, it begins to free us up in our own spirit to know God is in control. I may not understand this, but God has a purpose for all that happens in my life. That's what Paul is saying. Let me tell you what he isn't saying. I don't want you to be perplexed by this or did I miss something?
Is more than a
What he
question
isn't
of
saying
priority
is that
and dignity.
sickness,
It
suffering,
gives a level of
persecution,
maturity to our
grief,
lives that
or any
no
other
other
such
source
thing
can
is
provide.
good. He's not saying that. On the contrary, these things are evil. Hatred is not love, death is not life, and grief is not joy. The world is filled with evil, but what the text says is that God uses these things to effect His own good ends for His people. God brings good out of evil. Paul is telling us, the Lord takes all that He allows to happen to His beloved children, even the worst things, and He turns those things ultimately into blessing. Romans 8:28 reminds us that God has a plan that is better than ours. Sometimes it's uncomfortable, sometimes it doesn't make sense to us, but it is always for our good if we love God and are the called according to His purpose.
Mari ikut Yesus. Mari ke jalan yang benar. Tuhan berkati.